expected. Okay, so let's begin. And okay, so last class I have explained what is the objective in with which this subject has been introduced, and we will see how best we can learn from certain things. It's not possible that we learn everything from this particular subject, but I think this will help in sensitizing us on how do we look at disaster, and how do we look at the how do we look at from the architecture and planning perspective. Okay, so we have went through the contents and what is the expected outcome, all that in the last class. And today what we will do is we will quickly go into the first unit. In the first unit is about general introduction of disaster and resilience. Okay, and here the first topic is on different types of natural disasters and some statistics on how frequently this occurs in the world, and also specifically in Indian context. Okay, so okay. So before we go into the statistics and other things, let us first understand okay. What we'll do is we'll first try to understand what is how do we understand the term disaster, and what is the focus of it, and how do we define it, and then we will see what are the different types of natural disasters, and with that we'll stop for the day. Other things we will discuss in the coming class. So what is disaster? If you see, there are different components of disaster that we need to understand. Okay, so if you see from theoretical point of view, a disaster is an extreme disruption of the functioning of society that causes widespread human, material and environmental loss that exceeds the ability of affected society to cope up with the own resources. There are certain keywords here. Let me highlight, let me explain it to you, maybe after seeing all the definitions, but you can observe that there are certain keywords that is mentioned here, which says extreme disruption of functioning of society, that's one thing, and widespread loss of human, materials and environmental related things. Okay, and to such an extent that the society cannot cope up with. Okay, for example, let us say we get rain, right? We do get rain, we do get some tremors here and there, we do get extreme weather conditions. Okay, on and off, but some of it is manageable, some of it we are already resilient to it. Okay, what we are talking here is something which is beyond the ability of society to cope with. Okay, that's one key word that we should keep in mind. So a disaster is an event or series of event which gives rise to casualties and damage or loss of properties, infrastructure, environment, essential services, means of livelihood, on a scale which is beyond the normal capacity of the community to cope with. Okay, so it can be primarily the loss of life is our cause of concern, and also the loss of property. Okay, in addition to that, because of disaster the infrastructure will be disturbed, and as well environment and other essential services. Okay, and also I hope means of livelihood. Okay, for example, let's say the work we do, okay, the means of earnings, that will get disturbed. Okay, so once that is get disturbed, the entire that will have an implications on other aspects as well. Okay, so in that way, this is one of the things that we should keep in mind. Okay, so other things, if you see other definitions, if you see, disaster is sometimes described as catastrophic situation in which normal pattern of life or ecosystem has been disturbed and extraordinary emergency interventions are required to save and preserve lives and environment. Okay, so what are we discussing here is disaster is something which we cannot cope with. Okay, a society cannot do on its own. Okay, we need more intervention, emergency interventions from different stakeholders, so that normalcy is brought into picture. Okay, so these are some of the things that we should keep in mind. But if you see, in all three definitions, there are certain things which is common. One, we are talking about a disaster or a situation where the society cannot do something on its own. We need more help or more hands to help the society to come to normalcy. Okay, so these are common definitions, but we do have a definition adopted by the Government of India. We'll be seeing about this act, Disaster Management Act 2005, and I think probably many of us will be aware. This you must have read about this act in all the COVID briefings and the government orders that you read. There is some protocol there, right? If you read the first line, okay, if you read the first line, the all the measures, for example, lockdown measures or for any guidelines given by the Government of India, they invoke a act called Disaster Management Act 2005. Based on this act, Government of India can take certain decisions, and it can dictate the state governments and other authorities in the country to act in a certain way. Okay, and I think maybe if you take out all the briefings of the government, notice issued by the government, you will related to COVID, you will get to see this particular act being enforced. Okay, so in that act, it's about overall disaster management. Okay, so at the moment we are seeing or looking at from the COVID perspective. Otherwise, this is applicable for all types of disasters that the country faces. So there is a definition adapted by the Government of India on how do we define disaster, and what do you mean when do we classify this as a disaster. So it is in line with what we have seen previously, three definitions. Okay, but this is more relevant for us because it is there in the act. So what does it say? It says a disaster is a catastrophe, mishap or calamity or grave occurrence in any area arising from natural or man-made causes, or by accident or by negligence, which results in substantial loss of life. This is primary thing. Human suffering, damage to and destruction of properties, damage to or degradation of environment, and is of such a nature and magnitude to be beyond the coping capacity of community affected by the area. Okay, so it looks like a little extended version of what we have seen, what the first three definitions have seen. Okay, so it is more or less same, but it has been explicitly written to make a point that how do we define disaster. So in this case also we can see that there is a mention of natural event. Okay, there is a mention of loss of human life and properties and environment related issues, and to an extent that it cannot be managed by the local community. So we may need interventions from the district level or state level or even the country level. Okay, so that's the definition adopted by the Government of India under Disaster Management Act. How do you define a disaster? And also we have a generic definition adapted from United Nations, which says the occurrence of sudden or major misfortune which disturbs the basic fabric and normal functioning of a society. Okay, very in a subtle manner. This is how the disaster is defined in literatures and in the Act and from the UN perspective. Okay, so what is the takeaway from here? The takeaway from here is the disaster can be defined in two ways. Okay, one by natural disaster, or it can be man-made disasters as well. Broadly, so we all know about natural disasters, and of course we also know something about human-made disaster as well. Okay, so in this case, in our subject, in your curriculum, what is written is primarily on natural disasters. That is what we will be trying to understand. Okay, so the partly we are trying to understand this the disaster from the Act, from this particular Act is concerned. Okay, so if we, for example, let us say it can be floods, it can be drought, it can be earthquake caused by natural disaster, or it can be beyond this. Okay, so how do we classify this disasters? Okay, what this is broadly, we can classify disaster in terms of naturally occurring, or it can be in terms of human-made or man-made disasters. Okay, this is broad classification. However, we will be focusing primarily on natural disasters. We will see we will see further about natural disasters and how do we classify them. In terms of disasters caused by chemical or industrial accidents, environmental pollution, transport accidents, and political unrest are classified as human-made or human-induced disasters. Okay, and this is not there in the syllabus, so we'll not be discussing or studying or understanding about more of this in this particular course. Okay, so how do we define natural disaster? How do we classify natural disaster rather? So if you see theoretically and also from the National Disaster Management Act 2005, okay, which I just mentioned earlier, it classifies natural disaster that occurs in Indian subcontinent or in general in 5 ways. Okay, first one is geophysical, hydrological, meteorological, climatological, and biological disasters. So in all these 5 types, we have some in each of the case in the syllabus. Not all 5 is there. We have one example for geophysical natural disaster, hydrological disaster, and I think meteorological disaster. Yeah, meteorological cyclone is there, and there is no we are not covering on climatological and biological natural disasters. However, we can just briefly discuss about climatology and what we can do and how we can do from architecture perspective. Okay, so as far as the first type is concerned, geophysical disaster, there are subdivision. There are other disasters which are put under geophysical disasters. Okay, broadly, earthquake, volcanoes, and tsunami is put under a geophysical disaster. So what is it? Disasters triggered by earthquake. Okay, this is one of the type of natural disasters under geophysical disaster that we will be studying in detail. In fact, this is one of the units in the in your syllabus. We will go in deep and learn about it. Uh, Learn about different ways in which it can be addressed. What as an architect we can do. What NBC says about earthquake. How do we design buildings with reference to NBC, and what does it say about making designing buildings with which are earthquake resistance. Okay, so when we discuss about earthquake, it is not only earthquake, it will also have landslides. Okay, okay. So another thing that we should remember is when we say I think more and more the more case studies that we read about, the more discussions we have, you will get an idea that it's not one. Maybe it is an earthquake. Okay, earthquake may follow. We'll have an maybe landslide followed by earthquake, or maybe we may have tsunamis followed by earthquake. All that will happen. Okay, so one disaster will trigger the other disaster. Okay, and that's why it is called disaster, and because it is beyond control. Okay, so when we talk about earthquake and a movement of mass movement of earth material, in addition to earthquake, the earthquake may trigger landslides. It may trigger urban fires. Okay, liquefaction. I think this is one of the concepts that that you must have studied in your structures, which is nothing but for example, let us say we have some land, okay, and we have built structures on top of a particular topography, and over a period of time, maybe let us say because of the earthquake, let me erase this so that it is slightly clear. Let's say we have some terrain like this, and we have built buildings here, and underneath, let's say there is some fault line, and as a result of disaster, as let's say as a result of earthquake, the soil underneath the building, okay, this part may lose its strength. I think SBC, probably you must have heard about this, soil bearing capacity of different soils. That determines how much we can build, how tall we can build, what is the kind of foundations that we need, all determined by or all understood by the soil bearing capacity of a particular site. So let us say we have designed this building for a specific SBC. However, maybe after the earthquake, the same SBC may not stand good for us, and it may lose its strength. Okay, and primarily if it is water saturated, as mentioned here, from solid to liquid state caused by earthquake. So maybe there's some water coming in, and the strength of this upper strata becomes weak, and it loses its strength. Okay, we will see specific examples of all this on how what is the liquefaction, and how earthquake triggers liquefaction, and how it will affect the building, the design of buildings. So liquefaction is one of the after effects of earthquake, where the SBC is destabilized or it is affected, and as a result of it, the soil will not take up the buildings that we have designed here. Okay. In addition to that, mass movement of earth materials, usually in down landslides, maybe you can call it as landslides. Surface displacement of earthen materials due to ground shaking because of the earthquake. Okay, So this is the first part. Under geophysical disaster, earthquake is one of the disasters that is that we can that is put. And in fact, this is we will discuss about this in detail in coming classes. Okay, other things which is not discussed in your syllabus is just highlighted here. Volcanoes is another part of type of geophysical disaster, a surface displacement of earthen materials due to ground shaking triggered by the volcanic eruptions, or a type of geological event near the opening of the earth surface, including volcanic eruptions, lava, and other things. The third type, which is under geophysical natural disaster, is tsunami, and we all know what is a tsunami. Okay, a series of waves that are generated by displacement of massive movement of water through underwater earthquake, or it can be because of volcanoes under the water, and it can be because of landslides as well. Okay, so under geophysical disaster, there are three major disasters that has been put up here. Okay, that's one type. The second type is hydrological disaster. We are discussing all these disasters under natural disaster. No? Under primarily natural disasters, we are discussing 5 components here. The first one we have seen, geophysical disaster. Now we are seeing hydrological disaster. Under hydrological disaster, there are 3 things that is primarily discussed. One is floods, second is landslides, the third one is wave action. And in your syllabus, we have contents for floods. We will discuss about types of floods, how it occurs, and what are the mitigation measures that we should take in cities, and at building level what we can do, we will discuss as we go to that unit, when we go to that unit. So broadly what you can remember is there are 2 types of floods. One is called flash floods, okay, and other one is hydrological flood. Flash flood is also called pluvial floods. Maybe we'll discuss about it a little later, but just remember that there are 2 types of floods, flash floods and hydrological floods. What is flash flood? You can remember by the name itself. It's a sudden or heavy excess rainfall. It's only because of excess and sudden rainfall in a short period of time, okay, that produces a lot of runoff, creating flood-like conditions within minutes or within hours. Okay, this is very, very common in most of the cities in India. Okay, so for example, let us say the recent flood that I remember, or maybe many of you will remember, is of Chennai flood. Chennai flood is not this flash flood. Okay, that was different. What we experience in our cities is primarily because of the flash floods. Why does it occur? There are many reasons associated with that. We will discuss about that. But primarily, one is natural event. We can't do anything with that. It's climate change. It's just a natural phenomena. Certain things we cannot control. The second, that's one aspect. The second aspect is our cities and drainage patterns are not designed well enough to cope with this kind of excess rain. Okay, so that leads to floods, and it's primarily called flash floods. So if you see the definition, it says heavy or excessive rainfall in a short period of time that produce immediate runoff, creating flood condition within minutes or within hours or after the rainfall. Okay, so that's flash flood. Okay, so this is one type of flood. The second type of flood, for which many of the city is designed, and we do take care of this primarily. It is a general term for overflow of water from stream canals onto the normal dry land in the floodplains, higher than the normal level along the coastlines in terms of reservoirs. So, for example, let us say we have a city, okay, and we have a stream or a river passing through, and there is a carrying capacity of this particular river, and if the water and the volume and the discharge exceeds the carrying capacity of this particular stream or the river, it will of course overflow into the habitable areas, okay. Or we have let's say we have cities and we have wetlands and water bodies to store, let's say in case of rain, in case of excess rain also, these water bodies will act as a sponge and it will retain the water, okay. And of course all these things are physical, and it has got a defined boundary and it has got a defined depth, okay. And if we receive excess rain or excess runoff beyond the capacity of these water reservoirs or water bodies, then again once it gets filled, the excess water will flow into the cities, okay. So this is the second type of disaster, which is for which many of the cities have been planning for a long time now, and many of the steps are taken for addressing this particular disaster, flood. What do we do for this? We will discuss about it when we go to that particular subject. And also, like I told you in the beginning of in the first lecture, in the last class, one of my PhD student is working on how do we address this issue. So, for example, let us say, just to intrigue your or to create an interest in this particular subject, what are we trying to do is to understand. Let's say we have a topography, right? So land is something like this, and what do we do? We try to build buildings, right? We try to build not in line with this topography. What do? We actually make it flat, right? What do? We just make it flat, and then we try to make buildings. Okay, that's how we do cut and fill concept most of the time. As a result, what are we doing? This is supposed to be the natural terrain, okay. And if we remove all the buildings now, and if you redraw the terrain, it will be something like this, okay. Maybe some natural and again flat land, again something natural and flat land, okay. So we have created this deliberately, these flat lands, so that we can build buildings easily. Actually, this is supposed to be the natural terrain. So water does not understand this pattern, okay, because it is used to this pattern, and it has got its own way of taking. Let's say if this is the way in which water goes and it has to reach this place, so it has its own way, because it's for thousands and thousands of years it has been flowing in a particular direction, and it is aware how water has to reach from A to B. If we don't understand this, and we have not understood, or we have not honored this, and we have just altered this topography, okay, and now water will not honor our topography, altered topography. It will cause indentations, it will cause problem in our areas. Why? Because we have not honored the water's path, okay. So in her thesis, what are we trying to do is we are just trying to we are just trying to understand how this altered topography cause floods. It can be flash flood, or it can be the other one, hydrological flood. Okay, so maybe I'll invite her. We'll have it some presentation exclusive from. She's doing a case study in Bangalore on how this can be documented and explained. Okay, so that's about flood, and in addition to that, we have something called coastal floods also, where particularly the excess water because of high tidal waves. Okay, that's also part and parcel of flood. In addition to that, there is one more thing that we should keep in mind when we discuss about floods is the issue is not only of water, excess water. The issue is also of the debris it takes along the water. Okay, so mud flow, rock flow, or all the materials that it carries along the flood during the flood is also is a bigger cause of concern when it comes to floods. Okay, so this is the first type. The second type under hydrological disaster is landslides. Landslides can occur in higher altitudes. It can be in terms of snow, or it can be in terms of rocks and earth, and so on and so forth. And within landslide, coastal erosion is also categorized. Coastal erosion is one of the primary thing that is associated with the climate change, and also the their impact on the environment. Sea level rise and all that related stuffs are related to the coastal erosions and so on and so forth. But in our syllabus we don't have that in detail. We will not be discussing about it, but just to give an idea that this is there. The third type of natural disaster under hydrological disaster is wave action. Like I just said, waves generated wind generated surface waves that can occur on surfaces of any open water bodies such as oceans, rivers, lakes, and water bodies. The size of wave depend on the strength of the wind and the distance it fetch. Okay, this is another natural disaster that is put under hydrological disaster. This is the second type. Third type of disaster is meteorological disaster. Hazards caused by short-lived or micro to mesoscale extreme weather atmospheric conditions. Okay, there are two words here. One is called meteorological disaster. Then we have something called climatological disaster. What is the difference between meteorological and climatological? Okay, so one thing that you should always associate is meteorological is a long-term phenomenon. Okay, it is like defining what is weather and what is climate. Okay, climate is a long-term phenomenon, right? And weather is it can change in hours. Okay, let's say for example now it is sunny, maybe after 45 minutes, 1 hour we may have cloudy condition. Okay, so it is a short-term phenomena. We call it as weather. And the climate is a slightly longer phenomena. For example, let us say we get rains during September, October, November, and we have cold seasons in December, January. Okay, this is kind of a climate. So here again, the natural disaster can be broadly classified as meteorological disaster and climatological disaster. So under meteorological disaster, there are certain things which is put here, of which the first one is cyclone. Okay, and in your syllabus we have this in detail as one of the units. We will discuss about what are cyclones, what are tropical cyclones in specific, how it is formed, and what are global winds, and how does the global wind patterns across the world have an impact on local cyclones and so on and so forth. Okay, so the first type is cyclone, storm surge. There are different words for it. We will see what are tornadoes, tropical cyclones, convective storms or cyclones. How do we define it? What is the different? All that will try to understand that in later stages. And it can be under meteorological disaster. We can also discuss about cold waves and heat waves. Okay, extreme temperature, lightning and heavy rains, sandstorms, dust storms, and other climate related events. The fourth type of disaster under natural disaster is based on the climatological aspect. Unusual extreme weather conditions related to long-lived meso to macro scale atmospheric process ranging from intra-seasonal to multi-decadal variability. What do you mean by that? There are big words that is mentioned here. Let us break that into. It can be long-lived, okay, related to long-lived. For example, let us say we are not getting rain for. I hope it does not occur, but there are historical records which says that we don't get rain for years. Okay, there are certain conditions like that. So any such event, let's say we are not getting enough rain, not getting enough rain, or different things. Let us say not getting enough rain is a common phenomenon. We will see it with examples when we proceed further. So it can be weather related conditions. A climatological event disaster can be weather related conditions, which is long lived, meso to macro scale atmospheric process from intra seasonal to multi decadal. It can happen for decades. Okay, the problem can be so acute that for years we may not get rain, or for years we may have this drought like conditions. Okay, so under this climatological disaster, drought, extreme hot and cold conditions, forest fires, wildlife fires, glacial lake outbursts, subsidence, all that is put under climatological disaster. We don't have anything in this particular classification in our syllabus. We have only three types of disasters that we will be seeing. Okay, first is geophysical. Under geophysical, we will see earthquake in detail. Under hydrological disaster, we will see floods in details. And under meteorological disaster, we will see cyclones in detail. Okay, and the last type of natural disaster broadly that we can classify is biological disaster, exposure to germs and toxic substance, and epidemic. I think now we don't need any case studies, or we don't need much explanations on what do you mean by biological disaster. Okay, so we all are experiencing it now. Okay, so how it can affect our life, and how it can affect the entire economy of the country, everything. I don't think anybody, not a single person is left. Everybody is affected by somehow or the other. Okay, it may, for some it may be small disturbance. For some it is a catastrophic situation. Okay, both personally and also as a collective mean. Okay, and this is the fifth type under broadly the fifth type of natural disaster, which is biological disaster. Okay, I'll stop here, and we will see about India in specifically, and how India is prone to this kind of disasters, and particularly with respect to like I said in the beginning, National Disaster Management Act. Okay, from that lens, we will try to understand how India is and which are the major disaster which is prone for India, and what are the measures government of India is taking, what are the measures that we have to know as an architect, and also maybe urban designers and planners, so that we can help the city building a better design, and also to make cities which are resilient to disasters. Okay, so in summary, we said disaster. How do you define disaster? There are certain keywords in it. Human loss, okay, primarily human loss, and we also have environmental, infrastructure, and economic loss, and we can call it a disaster when it's not a routine phenomena. It affects in such a way that the society needs help. Without the collective help, without the help, the society cannot cope up this particular disaster. So when such situation arise, it is called disaster. And disaster can be classified as natural and man-made. Okay, primarily we'll be discussing in your syllabus on natural disaster, and which can be classified into 5 types. Geophysical, the second one is hydrological, then the third one is meteorological, and the fourth one is climatological, and fifth one is biological disaster. Under geophysical disaster, we will see earthquake, and we will learn about how do we understand it, what are the key terms that we should know about earthquake, and how do we design buildings for that, and what are the codal provisions in NBC and other related case studies. That's first thing. Second thing is on hydrological disaster. Under that we will see floods, different types of floods, and what are the precautions, what are the guidelines on floods, and so on and so forth. We'll see. The third one is on meteorological disaster. That's about cyclone, and we'll see how cyclones are formed, and how do we design buildings for cyclone resistance. Fourth and fifth is on climatological disaster and biological disaster, which is not part of with further details are not there in the syllabus. Okay, so with that I stop, and rest we will discuss in the next class. We will on Tuesday we'll meet.